Hi, warm welcome to everyone who is joining us for this webinar hosted by the World Resources Forum Association and the University of South Australia. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world, both to you as attendees, but also, of course, to our speakers who are joining us from different parts of the world. The topic today that we're gonna discuss about for the next 1.5 hours is quite a crucial topic when it comes to sustainability and fairness in the global use of natural resources. It's also one of those contested topics which is neither old nor new, and which tends to create some uncomfortable feelings because it reminds us that sustainability is not only a matter of sexy topics like the latest technologies and how they can be used to make greener the supply side of the economy, but also leads us to actually rethink the way that cities, governments, sectors, different industries, and also us as individuals are using resources and for what purpose. For today's webinar, we have a great lineup of speakers who is joining us, as I mentioned before, from different parts of the world, which I will also shortly introduce. So today we have with us Yamina Saeb, who is a senior climate and energy policy analyst at OpenX and a lead author at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Yamina introduced and actually advocated for the importance of sufficiency in the latest IPCC report, especially in relation to the built environment. Prior to this position, Yamina was Policy and Scientific Officer at the Renewables and Energy Efficiency Unit at the Institute of Energy and Transport of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And before that, she also worked as Senior Energy Efficiency Policy Analyst at the International Energy Agency. So a warm welcome to you, Yamina, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Yamina. Second, we have Priyanut Dharmaphiya. Priyanut is joining us from Thailand, where she has a long-standing career in the area of sufficiency, and she will provide us with a interesting and perhaps unknown perspective about sufficiency from Thailand, at least unknown for many of you and also many of us actually before this webinar. Priyanut has been chair and member of the Sufficiency Economy Movement in the education sector from the Ministry of Education, and secretary and member of the Sufficiency Economy Philosophy Subcommittee at the National Economic and Social Development Board in Thailand. More recently, Priyanut has been executive director of the Sustainable Development and Sufficiency Economy Studies Center at NIDA, always in Thailand, where she continues serving as a researcher and senior advisor. She also has multiple other positions, and she's really been active in conducting efforts among both public and private sectors to integrate sufficiency economy into Thai schools. Priyanut, warm welcome to you, and I guess it's a nice evening as well to you.
Yes, thank you, Manuel. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to a good discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Third, we have David Ness, who is an adjunct professor at the University of South Australia, who is the co-host of this webinar today. He has a background in architecture, urban infrastructure planning, and strategic asset management. He has been conducting research on fair, sufficient, and circular resource use, and is author of more than 100 publications, including the impact of overbuilding on people and the planet, and transforming rural communities in China and beyond. And he also is co-editor of The Green Economy and its Implementation in China. Within his research, David examines ways in which welfare societies may dramatically shrink their absolute resource consumption and GHG emissions, while redistributing resources to enable the disadvantaged to improve services, shelter, and infrastructure. And David, a very warm welcome to you as well, and greetings to Adelaide, where I guess you are joining us from. David, I see you're on mute because I imagine you were giving us some greetings, but I want to give you the opportunity then that the audience can hear you as well. Here you go.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I'm on the land of the Kana people, and one of their artworks is behind me, and they've been here over 60,000 years. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Indeed, it's quite an impressive heritage. Later, we have Valérie Quignou-Ramos, and Valérie joined ADEME, the French Agency for Energy Transition, in 2019 as the Executive Director for Foresight and Research. Her direction is particularly in charge of coordinating ADEME's prospective scenarios for carbon neutrality in 2050 for France, as well as coordinating the Finance Climate Project. Valérie graduated as a French engineer and a naval architect from the École Polytechnique and the National School of Advanced Techniques. And after that, she started his career as a naval architect and a med-ocean advisor in the oil and gas industry. In 2016, she joined the Corporate Sustainable Development and Environment Division and then the Strategy Division of the oil and gas company Total as Vice President on Climate Change. Until 2018, she was in charge of coordinating the 2 degrees roadmap and calculating the carbon footprint of Total, thus regularly in contact with the company's investors. And a warm welcome to you as well, Valérie, and thanks for joining us today.
Good morning to everybody attending, and thank you for the invitation as well.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ines dos Santos Costa, who is joining us from Portugal. Ines is a sustainability and circular economy champion, fostering networks between business, policymakers, knowledge centers, and communities to facilitate the transformation of our economy for people and planet. Currently, she's associate partner at Deloitte, and previously she worked as aide to the Minister of Environment and to the Minister of Environment and Energy Transition for the Circular Economy in Portugal, after which she became Secretary of State for Environment in the Portuguese government. Her background is grounded in industrial ecology and environmental engineering that looks into applying nature-based strategies and tools to improve the performance of businesses, regions, and systems. She's always looking for the next opportunity to grow even more on the field and hopefully to make a difference in the path towards a circular economy. And warm welcome to you, Ines.
Warm welcome to you all, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for joining us. Maybe just a couple of quick words before getting into the actual session. Of course, sufficiency is a very broad topic, which requires diving, actually pushes us to dive into different ramifications. We will not be able, also for the sake of time, to go into all of them today, but we will try to provide as much as possible an holistic overview into the topic of sufficiency. Of course, we will have a focus on sufficiency policies, but we'll also look at other topics such as what is the relationship between sufficiency and businesses, and also what is the role that education can play to actually create more sufficient societies. Just 2 words before about the agenda. So today we have 1.5 hours session. We start with a short keynote by Yamina, who will provide us with an overview about what sufficiency actually is, given the confusion and different understandings and even misunderstandings about the term itself. And then we will dive into a panel debate with all the speakers. Now, we want to make this session as engaging as possible. So to all of you who are joining us live today, please feel very free at any stage of the webinar, either during the panel, the keynote presentation, or during the panel debate, to raise your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. We will then take these questions and we will, of course, circulate them to the speakers. You can also indicate in case you have a specific speaker that you would like to address your question to, and we will take them up then towards the end of the session. This will also help me in my job as moderator today in actually getting interesting questions to the ground. So my name is Emanuele, I'm Communications and Events Manager of the World Resources Forum, and it's a great pleasure to host this session today. Okay, I think enough for presentations and introductions, and now we can proceed with the first act of our webinar today. So Yamina, please, the screen is yours for your input presentation. You are on mute as well. I don't know whether you started already, but just to make sure.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel, for organizing, and David for organizing this webinar. It's very important to have it today because there is a confusion in the scientific community, but also within the policy making sphere about what sufficiency is and what sufficiency could deliver. Fortunately, this time, for the first time, the IPCC report on climate mitigation that was released in April this year provided a definition that should help us all to move forward with the sufficiency concept. And in this report, we define sufficiency as a set of policies and measures, policy measures, and daily practices. The order is important. So first, policies to allow for these daily practices to be implemented. And these policy measures and daily practices are about avoiding the demand for energy, materials, land, and water. And actually, the full definition includes all other natural resources. So it's about avoiding the use of the natural resources at the first place, while delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. Human well-being for all is a question of justice. So sufficiency concept includes the justice issue. And of course, within the planetary boundaries, in the case of the IPCC report, we have been looking only to carbon emission reduction, but actually sufficiency addresses all the other planetary boundaries. So this definition is very important because it includes the 4 pillars that have been identified in the literature. And most of the people usually mix up sufficiency with efficiency because demand reduction was used to be considered from efficiency perspective only until today, actually. So all the literature, or most of the literature, is about efficiency reduction, the role of efficiency in reducing emissions and the use of resources. However, efficiency alone, as I will show you in the case of residential buildings, but it applies to all sectors, efficiency alone does not allow to decarbonize our global economy. And we need sufficiency, and sufficiency should be first, because sufficiency actually tackles the causes of climate change and the ecological crisis, while efficiency works on the symptoms. So when the consumption is already there, then when the energy needs is already there, then efficiency improvement, what it does is to make sure that the energy or material or other natural resources are used in the most efficient way. But if sufficiency tackles the causes, this means that it questions the needs of the people. And when you look at to the needs, there are plenty of solutions that are today provided to us that do not address our needs, that are not contribute to the well-being of the people. Other differences between sufficiency and efficiency is the fact that in the case of efficiency, it is mainly driven by market actor. So we make the assumption, and this is how efficiency policies work, that consumers and other market actors will go for the most efficient solutions that are in the market because it is the most rational thing to do. However, in practice, it does not work really like that. And in the case of sufficiency, we need a strong policy intervention. One example to illustrate the differences between the two is, for example, the mobility need. As citizen, what we need, we have a mobility need, and the solution that has been offered to us in the last, at least since the Second War, is our cars, individual cars. In the case of efficiency, if you are working only on efficiency, so what you would do is to try to make your car as efficient as possible, and you decarbonize, if possible, the energy used for your car. But if you work on sufficiency, if you consider sufficiency measures, and then you would question what are you would start from the need of the people. So the need is a mobility need, and then how to address this mobility need. There are different options. Cars could be one of the options, but it cannot be the only option. And among the options that we have, you have, if you work earlier on land use and urban design, so you could avoid the use of individual cars. So, and this is why we consider that sufficiency should be first compared to efficiency. And this is one of the reasons why efficiency does not fully deliver on the decarbonization. And this is what economists usually call the rebound effect that comes from the focus on efficiency. If sufficiency measures are considered at the first place, so we will not have the rebound effect that we see today because we consider only efficiency measures. in terms of efficiency potential, emission reduction potential, this is an example for residential buildings only at global level, but we have almost the same results for all other sectors. So these are the emissions between 1990 and 2019 in the global residential building stock. And what we see is that the dark blue that you see here is the effect of efficiency in reducing emissions. And you see that efficiency has contributed to reducing emissions from the global building residential building stock. So it has an impact that we can track today. The efficiency impact can be tracked. However, what you see here is the yellow bar is the fact that we did not have sufficiency measures has led to an increase or to fully offsetting the emissions reduction driven by efficiency. And this offsetting is, you see, the fact that we did not have sufficiency measures in the past has led to an increase of emissions of 52%, which means that all the efficiency measures have been offset. The emission reduction from efficiency has been offset, but it's also a missed opportunity to decarbonize the residential building stock. Another important finding when you consider sufficiency is that there is an important literature that argues that the emissions are driven by the increase of the population. And what we see here is that the increase of the population in the case of residential building have driven emission by 28%. However, the more we go further in the time, the more we are close to 2050, the lower will be the impact of the population. So when you consider sufficiency, you also question part of the literature that argues that all the emissions are driven by population and all the arguments behind the population growth. And then this is the past. So this is our heritage. We did not know about it. But now let's look to the future. To look to the future, we have selected several scenarios. These are scenarios from the International Energy Agency, and these are two scenarios from research community. In the case of the scenarios from the International Energy Agency, we look to the current policy scenarios and what would be, we estimated what is the sufficiency potential, the efficiency, and the one related to decarbonization. The dark red, the light red is the decarbonization of the supply. And what we see is that with the current policies, efficiency will continue to play a role in terms of reducing emissions. However, in the current policies, we don't have sufficiency measures at a global level. And this is why the lack of sufficiency will continue to drive emissions. And we see, as I mentioned earlier, that the main driver is the lack of sufficiency and not the population growth. And the current policy scenarios from the International Energy Agency is likely to be the most accurate scenario that we consider, that we should be considering for any comparison. And then, unfortunately, in the case of the International Energy Agency scenarios aiming for decarbonization, they have two scenarios. One is sustainable development scenario, and the other one is the new one, the net zero emission scenario. These two scenarios are both considered as Paris compatible because they lead to temperature below 2 degrees by the end of the century. However, this one is more close to 2 degrees and this one is around 1.5 degree target. And what we see is that in these two scenarios, prospective scenarios for the future, there are no sufficiency measures considered. And this is why sufficiency does not, so this 54% of the emission reduction potential is untapped in these scenarios. And this is unfortunate. And then when we look at the scientific, the two scenarios developed by small research communities, then what we see is that in the first one, so this part is the baseline, like this one, but we do consider that the baseline, the most accurate one, is the one from the International Energy Agency. And I do think that we should keep in mind that the potential sufficiency potential in residential buildings is around 54% with the current policies. But when you look at in this scenario, they considered sufficiency measures, but only in the global north, because sufficiency was understood before this IPCC work as a set of measures to be considered for the global north only. And in this case, even by considering only for the global north, we see that sufficiency, the yellow bar, is playing its role of reducing emissions. emissions, and this adds to the emission reduction driven by efficiency and renewables. And in the last scenario, we have sufficiency measures are applied for both the global north and the global south, and that's why the potential is much important. However, in this one, they did not consider, at the time we were working on the IPCC report, they did not consider all the consumption. It's only about thermal energy demand. And that's why the potential, we do not capture the full 55% that were identified here, or even what was identified here, 38%, because we do not, these scenarios do not include all the consumption, all the end uses that we have. So we see this from residential buildings, but we have exactly the same picture if we look at non-residential buildings, if we look at mobility, transport of goods, if you look at agriculture, food, etc. So the sufficiency potential is huge. It's around 50% in almost all sectors, and this potential is not captured by the most known scenarios aiming at 1.5 degree target, and it's not also captured in the policies that we have today. I will stop here and give back the floor to Emmanuel.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Amina. This was very interesting, and I think provides lots of inputs already for our discussion, and B, also very crisp and sharp. So usually moderators have the nightmare of too long keynote presentations at the beginning, but in this case, you made it rather a dream for me. Now, thanks a lot also for the inputs that you are providing. Especially, I will take one of your last sentences to open the panel debate, and directly on the point that you mentioned that sufficiency was, until the latest IPCC report, understood as an issue about the global north. Now, to counteract this claim on the ground, actually, I would like to go to Priyanut in Thailand, where sufficiency actually has quite an old history. So, Priyanut, I would like to ask you if you could lead us a little bit about the history of the sufficiency concept in Thailand. How did it come about, and also what are its principles? So, what is the understanding of sufficiency in Thailand?
Thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you so much, Yamina, for a very informative introduction of sufficiency in the north, as Emmanuel mentioned. In Thailand, actually, sufficiency, we call it sufficiency economy philosophy. You see, we have the word philosophy too. So it's more about the thinking and the mindset that we use to guide our decision making in either our lives or economic activities. We're starting having this sufficiency economy philosophy, which I will call, sufficiency mindset. When we had the 1997 economic crisis, if you remember, we call it Tom Yam Kung crisis, coming from Thailand. At the time, that Thailand is, the loyal, country. So His Majesty, the late King Bhumibol, has mentioned this word to the Thai people at the time we are struggling to get out of the crisis, that, a sufficiency economy means to have enough to support ourselves. So he talks more on, self-reliance and have enough to support the majority of, the Thai people, because the cause of the crisis is that we consume too much. We don't have, a rational decision in economic activities. We borrow so much, we depend so much on the international finance community at that time. That led to the economic crisis. There are three principles of sufficiency in Thailand. We call it is guiding principles for decision making. They are moderation. I will talk about this, why we have this moderation, reasonableness, and prudence. So whatever we do, we have to think about these principles and have these to shape our decision. But to be able to make that, the king emphasized that we have to be knowledgeable. We have to know what we are working with and working on. And upon all of everything, we need to have virtues, moralities, attributes. Without virtues, there would be no sufficiency at all in our decision making. And at the end, the king also said that whatever we do, we should aim to balance our development, because before the economic crisis, we put so much emphasis on economic development. We ruin our, we had deforestation. Our society has been, morally corrupt. So with that, he mentioned that balanced development among economy, society, environment, and culture. He always reminds us that, to be able to have sustainable development, we have to cherish our culture as well. So that's the origination of sufficiency economy philosophy in Thailand.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Priyanut. And I think it's quite an enriching perspective, and which actually opens up our horizon and broadens our horizon when we think about the term of sufficiency, how deep it goes, and not only about, of course, how we structure our policy frameworks, but really the way we use our resources, and we go thinking about resources in a very holistic way in relation to nature and to human well-being. So I see some points of commonalities, of course, also with the definition that Yamina provided before, but it also provides a very fresh perspective from a different setting, where also the dimension of spirituality perhaps is different, but nevertheless very enriching also for us, coming from a different part of the world. We will come back later to the topic of sufficiency in Thailand. We will look at certain examples and also more specific instances. For now, we like to take the opportunity to jump from the Asian economic crisis that you mentioned in 1997 to the concept of sufficiency for businesses. So I was reading actually a very interesting paper some time ago from some Thai authors who did some studies about what was the performance of companies in Thailand, specifically SMEs, which were using sufficiency principles in their operations. How were they performing during the Asian crisis of 1997? And what they found out in this empirical work was that actually companies who were embracing sufficiency principles, there was a definition for that, of course, were performing better than counterparts who were not following these sufficiency principles, also the ones that you just mentioned. And I find this quite interesting because it really leads us to think more strategically about the topic of sufficiency and business. And I would like to take this topic now with Ines. Ines, sufficiency sometimes is treated either as a policy targeting governments or as an individual issue. So we should consume less as individuals, while businesses are perhaps left a bit to the sideline. Things are starting to change now, I think, both in the academic field and in practice, but not yet the prominence that it probably deserves. And sometimes we are used to associating the word of sufficiency almost as an oxymoron compared to business, right? If you are being sufficient, you are actually not doing business. But is this the case? So what does sufficiency have to say in relation to business? Is it an opportunity or is it actually a threat?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, business, I think the logic of sufficiency has changed in the recent years in regards to business responsibility in driving this logic. Certainly that there is still a lot to be done, of course. There is still a lot of push towards consumers and citizens, the responsibility of acting responsibly in respect to consumption. But the fact is that every business survey that is done about sustainability, at least in the recent years, it is one of the top answers is we need to consume less. So it's businesses need to take stock of those answers and try to integrate business in their business models, approaches, principles, practices that really drive lower throughput of materials and energy, because that is really what we are talking about. And it is not an issue of making more with less, because that is what efficiency is about, doing more with less, but we are doing more and more of that less. So that's the Jevons paradox that Yamina was talking about before. So in order for sufficiency to work, it needs to actually be coupled in a bundle between efficiency, sufficiency, and efficacy of what businesses can bring into the market. Of course, a lot of these topics have been approached under the scope of circular economy, because circular economy has become, has exploded in recent years about being this new paradigm of economic development that we need to put forward to. But what we forget is that circular economy is being introduced on top of a model which is still essentially linear. So it's sort of risks the danger of being co-opted by linear thinking while still doing or delivering a circular product of service. So it is an issue actually of changing the mental models of the C-suite in business. The famous iceberg, sustainability iceberg that we usually see, it says that what lies beneath, it's really changing mental models, worldviews of the C-suite in order to find value in the logic of sufficiency. And that is what recently has been driving more and more companies into doing it. So, for instance, think about what Patagonia has been doing when they launched the campaign of "Do not buy this jacket." They are being active in saying, we need to rethink our business models, and we need to take stock of the materials that we have and make do with materials which are already available in our production and consumption system. And there lies an opportunity, a very interesting opportunity for companies to really find strategies that are able to value that circulation of resources and energy instead of being dependent on extraction and on energy extraction from a system which is not able to cope, not for much longer, with the demand that it is placed on it. So I think that policy has a lot to play in this picture, because businesses usually typically start sufficiency very lightly, sort of still placing the onus on the consumer. So in order to bring the game up, so reduce, refuse, rethink, to bring the game from just rethink to refuse and reduce, policy can really bring interesting an interesting context into the picture. What the European Commission has been doing, although this is a little bit how do you say it, contrasting with other types of policies, but when you think about, for example, the right to repair, or when you think about the green claims legislation that is coming up, hopefully in the beginning of next year, or when you think about the eco-design directive and the obligation to track every single process in the value chain into the information that you have access to in the product, including its impact, social and environmental impact. When you think about the corporate sustainability reporting directive and what it demands of companies to provide in terms of information of what they are really doing, these are all subtle. Some are more subtle than others, I'll give you that, but these are all hints that will, push for those mental models in the C-suite to change and really focus on the value of the service and the product, the intrinsic value that they are delivering, and how they are able to cope with extending the valuation of that product and service for longer without the need to bringing more throughput into the system, and thus bringing the levels of consumption and production into aligned with the planetary boundaries. So a lot of things coming up in the short term, hopefully, and I think that businesses will increasingly be asked to step up their game on this.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ines, for this, I must say, encouraging perspective as well on making business sense out of sufficiency. I imagine in some cases, especially at the C-suite, but even at other levels of an organization, sufficiency might still be a taboo, depending also on the understanding which is there. But as you mentioned, there are many opportunities that really would lead a business to rethink, apart from the obvious need to do so from a planetary perspective, of course, but also from a business perspective, opportunities that will come along getting down this path. We will come back.
I just let me say this. I usually made, in order to explain what sufficiency and logic of sufficiency is, I usually made a pun with the former Minister of Environment. It's something that he enjoyed a lot. So when you think about the glass half full, half empty, when you ask someone this, no, the logic is the glass is double the size that it needs to be. That is the logic of sufficiency right there.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. Indeed, I think this gives quite a graphic representation of that. We will come back later to this topic, also diving more into the details of potential business models and some distinctions there, which are quite important. For now, I would like to go to Valerie. Valerie, as I mentioned during the introduction, in your work at ADEM, you have been developing this exercise or model, I don't know what's the best way, which we also see in your background, actually, which is the Transition 2050, where you developed 4 different scenarios for France to achieve carbon neutrality. What was behind this exercise? So why did you start it? And what are these 4 scenarios that you have been working on? So perhaps also pointing out what is the role of sufficiency into these 4 scenarios.
Thank you, Emanuele. So actually, we started this exercise in 2019. And if you remember well, it was a few months after the publication of the IPCC report on the 1.5 degree objective. And actually at ADEM, we were kind of inspired by this report where the IPCC had developed as well 4 scenarios based on 4 different shared socioeconomic pathways. And we actually tried to kind of imitate those pathways to the situation in France. And basically, we had 2 objectives in mind in 2019 when we started this work. It was first to get information in order to shed light on the necessary transition that the country had to do before the presidential elections. We had presidential elections in 2022, and the debates actually started in 2021. So when we started that in 2019, we had 2 years to get prepared for those debates. And another objective was also to provide a lot of information for the current work that is ongoing in France, which consists in preparing our 3rd national strategy, low carbon strategy, which is a kind of our NDC, I would say, for the world objective of carbon neutrality. And this is actually going on at present. The work that we have conducted on our scenarios is getting used in working groups to prepare the next low carbon strategy for France. So those 4 scenarios, in a few words, consist in using actually 3 levers for reaching carbon neutrality. The first one, which is the topic of today, is sufficiency. The second one is energy efficiency. And the third one is decarbonization. So I suppose that the public here doesn't need to have an explanation about the differences between those 3. Basically, we have 2 scenarios. One is called frugal generation, and the second regional cooperation. 2 scenarios which are mainly based on sufficiency. The first one, with the name frugal, means that sufficiency is really pushed quite hard by the government or by obligations, taxes or things like that, which really forces sufficiency. In the second one, regional cooperation, as cooperation mentions it, it's more a question of using discussions, debate, consultation to reach in a smoother way sufficiency. But of course, it takes more time. Then we have a third scenario, which is called green technologies, which is really based more on energy efficiency and on decarbonization than the first two. And then we have a fourth scenario, which we have called restoration gamble, which basically doesn't use sufficiency at all. It's mainly based on only energy efficiency and decarbonization, which is actually close to the current trends that we see in France today and probably in the world today. And we wanted to show that if we just rely on energy efficiency and decarbonization, then we need to believe that direct air carbon capture and storage will save us. And you know, those are these systems which are supposed to capture the CO2 emission directly from the atmosphere and then put that again, I would say, in the soil to make it simple. Those technologies today exist, I would say, only at a very experimental stage in 2 or 3 locations and just capturing a few thousands of tons of CO2, so nothing compared to the need that we would have if, again, we don't do anything about sufficiency. So basically those 4 scenarios show that we cannot go around using the lever of sufficiency. It's really necessary, and it's for us a kind of guarantee that we will manage the transition. And we also wanted in that exercise, we started with Priya was mentioning mindsets and the culture basically that we need to develop, and we started with lifestyles to illustrate in those 4 scenarios how the lifestyles would be for eating, for moving around, for working, for living in buildings, in cities, or in the countryside. Starting by that, in order to better be able to speak to, you know, the normal citizens, but also to be better to speak to the private sector, to see indeed, as Ines mentioned, how new business models could be developed, mainly actually based on a kind of economy of functionality rather than an economy of just good consumptions. And we had, by the way, also some additional work about the effect of those scenarios on some industrial sectors, like the logistics of the last kilometers, for instance, or on the sector of gas and liquid fuels. We also had an analysis of the macroeconomic effects of those 4 scenarios in order to show that actually we could imagine a decoupling of a growth of the economy and a degrowth, I would say, of good consumptions and thus of CO2. So I could speak a lot about it again, but maybe yeah, I'll stop here for the moment.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Valerie. We will anyway have time to then dive into these scenarios later on. For now, I think it's a very interesting exercise that you made, because we often have these targets and, of course, the Paris Agreement, but also commitments by countries and different industries, but without a clear path on how to get there. So by developing these scenarios, we actually can start differentiating what could be a more solid reality from what could be more of a fairy tale. And if I understand you correctly, based on the analysis that you made, it looks like any scenario which doesn't include in any way some sufficiency measures as of today, given also the state of technologies that other scenarios would imply, looks a bit more like a fairy tale than a solid path to actually achieve that. So thanks a lot. I will go to David, but I see Yamina, maybe you want to make a quick comment on this.
Yes, please. Thank you. It's just about the scenarios. I have been looking to the global scenarios aiming at 1.5 degree target. Most of them do not consider sufficiency measures, and that's why they end up relying on unproven technologies. So for me, the choice today is between including sufficiency in the scenarios and the policies, or relying on solutions that we will not have, which means we cannot decarbonize. And this is just to confirm the conclusions that ADEME did at the French level.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Yamin. And I think that's indeed a key point, and perhaps also one of those points, restoring a bit of hope in the because now we're used to getting also newspaper headlines where we are frankly said to say goodbye to 1.5, but actually we have to say 1.5 goodbye only if sufficiency is not there. So that's also restoring some hope. I see some questions coming in the Q&A, so thanks a lot for that. We will definitely take them up later. For now, I go to David finally in Australia. David, also Yamina in her presentation focused a lot on the built environment. Now, the built environment is clearly one of those central sectors to look at for when we talk about sufficiency, when we actually talk about moving towards sustainability. You have been researching a lot in this area. I would like to ask you, why does the built environment need sufficiency so urgently? And also, what do sufficiency practices in the built environment look like? You can also, of course, focus on commercial construction or any of the different types of built environment that there are there. So, David, please, to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah, the built environment is arguably the largest producer of emissions and the highest consumer of resources, and I'm talking about buildings and infrastructure. But the problem, as I see it, the major problem is a general prevailing growth mindset. Especially here in Australia, because in Australia we have virtually no policies that mention sufficiency. It's barely mentioned. But the growth mindset seems to encompass building big and more. Building big and more is seen by governments and the industry and everyone as increasing prosperity. But, as with other higher income countries, here new construction is proceeding at a really frantic rate. You know, there's office and other towers springing up all over the place in my city. And reliance, as has been said, is placed on energy efficiency and renewable energies. And actually, the other day, the Australian Climate Authority released a report on how Australia is tracking and what policies are needed. There's absolutely no mention of sufficiency. So that needs to change. But in the built environment, coming back to the built environment, one good sign is that there is recognition these days of the carbon embodied in the production of buildings. But this is mostly at the materials level, and it's mostly at concerning efficiency. But my concern is there's no concern, or there seems to be no concern in housing and in office buildings and other buildings about growth in floor area. So growth in floor area is where sufficiency can really come in and make a big difference. And growth, this problem of growth in floor area was recently highlighted in the report of the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, put out by UNEP. It highlighted the problem, but what I can see so far, there hasn't been a solution put forward. And also the report and other reports have predicted that the built floor area globally will double, can you imagine that, by 2060? And I think that amounts to about 230 billion square meters of new floor area. And also there's general talk in the industry in the US about the need to build at the rate of another New York City every 34 days until 2060. Can you imagine that? Another New York City. And the other day I heard the Inga Anderson, who's head of UNEP, she referred to building another city the size of Paris every week. So this kind of thinking is very concerning. And I really think those growth-based predictions need to be really challenged and reassessed. And another thing with the building industry is even though buildings are built big and highly consuming, they managed to get green and net zero carbon labelling. I mean, just a couple of days ago, there was a huge new building, about 40,000 square meters in my city, and they say they're going to be net zero carbon. I mean, it's laughable if it wasn't so serious. And so the green building rating systems around the world need to get on board with this and reform the system, which is based on the amount of carbon per square meter, which is a totally inadequate metric to constrain building size. So sufficiency policies, as has been said, are really urgently required, and with business champions, as Ines mentioned, who can really embrace sufficiency and find that it can lead to more, not less, income via innovative and cost-saving solutions. And that may involve building less, and also, as someone said, the Jess Scully, who was a former Deputy Lord Mayor of Sydney, she said, we need to make our buildings and spaces work harder, make them work harder. So we're not there yet, but there are some encouraging signs. The business school in my university is interested in this, and I've had, after working with Arup on a circular economy, we came up with a circular economy platform for reuse of components, but now we're talking about sufficiency. We have a way to go yet, but the good thing is that Arup in its circular economy toolkit, the first point up front when considering whether to build or not is, do we need to build? So questioning the need to build. So so I'll just wrap up, and I just want to say that it's really important that we develop policies that constrain the overall growth in new floor area. And I think targeting office buildings can be a good start, because of the COVID response showed us that a lot of business can be transacted, even retail and other things, online with using digitalization and working from home, which lessens the need to construct new buildings. But despite all that, what's really frustrating is to see the new buildings still going up. We've really learnt nothing. And this need to constrain the overall growth in floor area, I think it's a blind spot, an elephant in the room, which needs it needs urgent attention. And it's really good to see that Valerie and Adim have mentioned in their scenarios about limiting the floor area of housing. But I suggest that offices and other commercial buildings could perhaps be added. We can work together on that. So I think the other thing I want to say is to really develop sufficient solutions in the building sector. We really need to start at the inception of projects, at the real upfront stage, where if we don't build at all, we can save up to 100% carbon. Or if we build less by adaptation or building, novel solutions, we can save about 80%. So in that upfront stage is where it's really exciting. And I've actually had some discussions with people at the uni and Arup. And we discussed that, Arup can actually gain more fees by coming up with solutions that avoid their clients the need to build in the first place. So I think I'll end there, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. That's actually a very important contribution, I think, and a good link as well. As you mentioned, some of the statistics before, the built environment looks sometimes like one of those monsters without any control, right? So growing and growing without any clear purpose. But that's clearly not what we need going forward. Ines, I see you raised your hand. I was going to bring it in Thailand again, but please, short.
No, it's just to complement what David is saying. There are a couple of examples, very interesting examples around certain cities. For instance, I remember right from the get-go, Amsterdam, for example, has a building code that says, that demands that for every new building that is, or any restoration building that goes on in the city, they are demanded by law, since the license for construction demands that they are able to integrate materials which are removed from the constructing building. So they keep the same materials going within the city. So it's a demand from the city council that every building that goes up or is restored needs to go into this depot of materials that exists from previous demolitions in order to get materials into the building. That is an example of how you can sort of bring in a logic of limitation for innovation. So they use the old materials, but they rearrange them in a new manner. Another example, for example, here in Portugal, in Évora, there was some research made by André Coelho from IST University a couple of years back, where he made some calculations about implementing this sort of cap on material, on the amount of materials used in construction within the city of Évora. And he found out that around 98% of the materials can actually be contained within that cap and being reused again and again in a very productive way. So there are approaches that you can use at the city level planning and licensing zones that can help in bringing up innovation in construction by using the same stock of materials that you have. That's just to complement what David was saying.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ines. It's actually a very interesting and important perspective that shows indeed how framework conditions can be a driver for innovation, even when it's about sufficiency, and maybe especially when it's about sufficiency. And it's also one of the aims of this webinar, indeed, to try to shape a narrative as sufficiency being a driver for innovation rather than an obstacle to it, and perhaps even rethinking a little bit what we mean by innovation. Now, I would like to go to Prinut again to get some good inspiration for us. So Thailand has around 20 years at least of opportunities for developing sufficiency in practice based on the introduction of the concept by the king, as you mentioned, around the Asian crisis in 1997. What is the relationship of sufficiency, or what does sufficiency imply for sustainable development in Thailand, or for the conception of what sustainable development should be about? And maybe if you also in this context can bring to the table some examples about how sufficiency has been applied in Thailand for both delivering well-being for all, but also with a context of sustainability. And of course, can be either at a national, local, company level. You can, let's say, take insights from any scale that you would like.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. Actually, I really agree with David and Ines. You know, in Thailand, we have those examples too, to, you know, reuse the, like, you know, building materials, or, you know, things from, you know, infrastructure. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. I'll answer Emmanuel first. How sufficiency mindset leading us to sustainable development. I would like to mention that, you know, 1997, people are not talking much about net zero or 1.5 degree, but Thailand, you know, Thai people were alerted already about, you know, the devastating of consumerism in the society. So this mindset coming to bring us back, you know, to see the reality. And I mentioned earlier that maybe this may be aligned with, you know, religious thought. You know, it's not just Buddhism. To see that, you know, the resources are limited, you know. So that's why we have to be moderate in our consumption. So we have to come back to be responsible consumer, not to be, you know, affected by consumerism. So that's the first thing that comes up, you know, with sufficiency principle. And with reasonableness principle, it, you know, imposes us to think and think and think before we buy, before we purchase, before we consume, before we produce anything. We have to think about the impact and the causes of why we are doing this. You know, like, you know, David mentioned that, you know, do we need to build? In Thailand, we said, do we need to buy this more? Don't we have enough already, you know, of these types of things in our house? So it's just, you know, transforming, you know, the way we think, the way we related to nature and society. So this is why we call it sufficiency mindset. But I think the most important thing that we didn't have before the crisis is that even business or, you know, household, you know, have to be more resilient. So how to be resilient in our, you know, daily activities, or in our, you know, business may have, you know, risk management. But risk management is about, you know, thinking about strategy, but doing what this and that. But this is a mindset that we have to aware that everything always, you know, changing. We never thought before that the COVID-19 will come to us, right? In 2019, we were just, you know, kind of perfectly in the, like, you know, tourism industry is growing. But when the COVID-19 hit us, you know, everyone just talking about service economy in Thailand. My goodness, you know, we were not prudent enough. We were not prepared, you know, the saving enough to go through this COVID-19. So that's why, you know, during the COVID-19, you know, not only young people, you know, everyone just talking about, we have to bring back the sufficiency living into our society. We have to build more resilience in our society. So sufficiency living is about having mindset that we think in the long term, what we are doing that may affect, you know, society or economy or the nation, or even the cultural, you know, dimensions in development. So it's about thinking, leading our actions that service economy leads to sustainable development.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Prinut. And I think this focus on resilience is key, and we see it everywhere, that the systems were built, starting from the healthcare, but the energy systems now in Europe, especially, we have a very clear We touch with the fact that the systems we built are completely the opposite of resilient. They are extremely fragile. Also, supply chains in this globalized world, everything is extremely fragile, and the consequences in business as usual may be sidelined. But then when external shocks come, we really understand that perhaps the wrong choices were made for too long in a row. So this focus on how sufficiency leads us to resilience, I think it's a very important point to the discussion. I would now like to go to Valerie, also taking one of the questions that came in the chat. Valerie, during your exercise Transition 2050, you of course started, if I'm not wrong, about thinking about how France could achieve carbon neutrality. But of course, in an interconnected world, you probably quite soon got to the conclusion that international relations and the interlinkages between countries cannot be sidelined in this debate. In the chat, I saw one question in relation to the just transition. So if a place like France, for instance, shifts to a more sufficient society, what does this imply for those countries who are currently at the beginning of linear supply chain? So for instance, countries with high resource extraction. I think the comment was from Australia, if I'm not wrong, but of course, many African countries or Latin American countries as well fit that type of profile. So coming to you, what are the conclusions that came from your exercise in terms of the international dimension? So when it comes to France interacting with other countries, and whether you thought about this element of just transition to sufficiency as well. So what would that imply for countries which are currently net exporters of natural resources, for instance?
All right, thank you. And maybe before answering that question, I'd like just to give some echo to what David said earlier, and in particular about, concretely what sufficiency means in our scenario, because indeed, I mean, we worked on examples of sufficiency for food, for mobility, and buildings. And buildings for individual homes as well as for the tertiary, I don't know if we say tertiary sector. And indeed, it's a question, it's funny because I noted it's a question of growth in floor area. It's really drastically decreased in our scenarios, in sufficiency scenarios, going from an average today of 15 square meter per person to 12 square meter per person for tertiary, for offices, basically. It also a question of making building work harder, if I take the David's expression again, because in those scenarios, we really thought that there's no point in having empty homes. There's no point in having secondary homes that you use only 1 week a year. So the idea is really to make sure that all existing buildings are used as principal residential homes. It's also a question of offices like my office here, for instance, which are used only 10 hours a day, could potentially work harder by being used in the evening for other purposes. So I completely share what David said. And I could provide more examples, but now back to your question, the international dimension. So that's actually a topic that is, I would say, currently being finalized in our study, because so far we had looked only at the carbon footprint at the scale of the hexagon of France. But we are finishing a very long exercise, which is actually quite close to a research exercise on the carbon and resources footprint of those 4 scenarios. And basically what it leads to is to show that okay, at the level of France, we have now some pathways to reach carbon neutrality, fine. But if we look at the greenhouse gases and materials footprint, including the effect of the French consumption on the emissions abroad, then actually it's very hard to reach the objective of 2 tons per person per inhabitant. We are actually quite far away from that if we don't make any effort in decreasing also the efficiency, the material efficiency of the production abroad. If we don't do any effort in accompanying, helping those countries in decreasing the use of resources and the emissions of CO2, we will not reach in France this global target of 2 tons per inhabitant. So there comes, in my opinion, the idea of, if we want to reach that objective in France, it's also a question of a just transition in also helping the countries from which we import goods in reaching their own transition. So that's one point. And maybe if I could also do another point about this question of just transition. Actually, in France, we have 2 ways of thinking about it. The international dimension, which I just mentioned, but there is also the dimension in France of just transition between the people who can afford to think about sufficiency and those who, on the other hand, would like to be able to think about sufficiency, but which today are suffering from energy poverty. So we also want we are working on that question of just transitions in terms of making sure that everybody takes its part of responsibility in reaching sufficiency, and also accompanying, helping the ones which are suffering from that. And it's a question of people who are suffering from energy poverty, but it's also a question about businesses which will suffer in the next few years about this transformation. There are some industries, there are some businesses which tomorrow will have to completely change their business model, and it will certainly have an impact on employment, on the types of skills that will be required for the jobs of tomorrow. So that has to be prepared as well, and we are trying to help the government to work on that. Also, and maybe I will end about that. When we speak about sufficiency, we often think about resources, materials, goods of consumptions, and CO2. But in our exercises, we also try to introduce the notions of the use of soil, the use of biomass as resources, the use of water, not only metals and materials, but all those 3 topics as well. And I don't know if you are aware of that, but in France we have an objective of 0 net artificialization of soils. And actually that objective is only reached in our 2 scenarios using sufficiency. The 2 using only, I would say, or more energy efficiency and decarbonization do not reach that net 0 artificialization. And similarly, the use of biomass, the use of water is much easier to deal with when you start, I would say, thinking about sufficiency before thinking about efficiency and decarbonization.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Valerie. That's very interesting insights that came from your exercise. And I think you made a very important remark as well about we always think about just transitions and something related to richer countries and less rich countries from let's say nowadays with this GDP metrics or whatever the mainstream uses. But let's not forget that indeed in each country there are massive differences. In each city there are massive differences, and of course also the sufficiency transition in a place like France impacts in a very asymmetric way different socioeconomic classes. Yamin, I would have come to you anyway, because I think you have something to say on this just transition. You mentioned before this sufficiency relation to justice. What would you like to add? And also whether you have some more macroeconomic insights into this. So if you looked at jobs, what would that imply from that perspective as well, the sufficiency transition?
Yeah, so just one point about the energy poverty. Energy poverty is not sufficiency measure. Energy poverty is the failure of our policies in providing decent housing for the most vulnerable people from economic perspective. So this is not choice. These people are locked in more than 4 decades, in the case of France, of urban sprawl that has led to increasing the energy, because when you have urban sprawl, you have single family homes. And the dream that has been sold to us in the last 40 years is that we always see that they show us families, very happy families in single family home with a small garden. They do not show that this family cannot pay for its energy bill. So it's a nightmare in reality. So the dream that was sold to us in the last 4 decades is in reality a nightmare for the middle class or the lowest middle class. And with the energy crisis that we are facing in the EU and the increase of the prices, so these people are becoming, even if they were able to pay 10 years ago their energy bill, now they cannot pay anymore for their energy bill. And usually this, when you live in single family home, you have your energy demand is much more important, because each of your facades interacts with the outside. While when you live in a multi-family building, you are protected. You have only few facades that are not fully exposed. And we should not mix up this failure of our policies, 40 years of policies in the case of France, with sufficiency. If we would have had sufficiency measures, we would have never had urban sprawl, because sufficiency is about avoiding urban sprawl. And if you don't have urban sprawl, this means you will not have single family homes. And if you don't have single family homes, this means you will not lock middle class or lower middle class in buildings that require a huge amount of energy that they cannot afford. You see, so it's because we did not have sufficiency policies and we had the opposite in the last 40 years that we ended up with energy poverty. And now that we have energy poverty, and just to give, because we have an international audience, energy poverty in the EU is defined as the lack of, is about the fact that people cannot pay for their energy bill. At international level, energy poverty is defined as the lack of access to energy services, to energy. You see, it's different. But if we stay within the EU context, so what we need to do, what governments must do, is to end energy poverty. But unfortunately, in our policies in France and in the EU, in all the OECD countries, we don't have a target to eradicate energy poverty. We have a target to alleviate energy poverty, which is not the same. So this means that intellectually, we accept the idea that some of our fellow citizens cannot heat their homes. And this is completely wrong conception of the society, and this goes against sufficiency. If we would have had a sufficiency philosophy like in Thailand, I guess that my generation would have been trained to never accept the idea that some of our fellow citizens cannot pay for heating their homes. But it's not what we have, unfortunately. And then in terms, and that's why in the sufficiency definition that is in the IPCC report, we have this providing well-being for all. Well-being for all, and it's not about what we have today, well-being or for minority, while the majority, we have an increasing majority, even in our big democracies, failing, actually depraved from the basic services of the modern world. And what we usually forget, there is a link, strong link, but it's not well studied today. There are only few studies showing that. There is strong link between the continuation or the success of democratic regimes and the sufficiency, because democratic regimes, they work only if you have the majority of the people, the highest majority possible, having access to the modern services. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we are in the situation in our democracies, in the big democracies, we are in a situation where we failed in the last, since the Second War, we failed in providing these services to the majority. We have been we stopped, for example, investing, or we really lowered investment in public housing in all EU countries. We lowered investment in public housing. If you don't have, there is not enough offer for the middle class and the lowest middle class. And if we continue in this direction, it will be the end of democratic regimes. So there is a link between sufficiency. Sufficiency would avoid, if we would have strong sufficiency policies and strong ones implemented. So this means we'll avoid the inequality issues that we have today in our countries. And this will lead to more prosperous and more happy democracies. Regarding the jobs issue, and the more macro level of sufficiency, unfortunately, there are no studies at this stage that estimates the sufficiency, except for France. At global level, I don't know any study that shows that. But what we know is that sufficiency today's economy is based on products. So basically, you buy a laptop, you buy a car, you buy a house, and sufficiency is about services. You don't really need to have a car. You don't need to own your car. What you need is that from time to time, when you need a car, you need to have the service available, offered by your municipality, which is not the case everywhere. It's exactly the same story, and I know it's very shocking for most of us, because we were raised with the idea that we need to own our home, and we all run after having a mortgage to own our home, because there is no offer. There is nothing, because in case you need a house from the public housing. But actually, it's the same story. You don't really need to own your home. Why? Because the home that you have when you are student, your needs, your housing need when you are student are different from your housing need when you start your when you engage in family, and then your housing need will be different if you have 1 or 3 kids, and when you become older, your housing needs will be also different. If you buy your home, you will be locked in the home that you bought, because then you cannot sell it. You cannot, it's very difficult to move in all our countries. And that's why sufficiency, if it is implemented, this means that the current economic model is going to completely change. The current economic model does not allow for sufficiency policies to be implemented. We need to shift to different economic model that is based on services. And this means that we will have jobs created in the service economy in providing these services. Of course, to provide these services, we will still need to produce product, but it will not be an economy driven by product. The balance between the two is unknown, except in the case of France, but Valérie could say more about this. From my understanding is that the economic analysis of the ADEME scenario, the frugality, the one that is mainly based on sufficiency, does not lead to degrowth. It leads to a different type of economy. So some activities will disappear, but other activities would appear. And what governments should do is to manage this transition. So the transition for me is from the current economic model that is leading us to the climate breakdown to an economic model that would lead to the well-being for all. But unfortunately, at this stage, I don't have figures to share.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Yamina. I just that's a very important point, especially the one also about democracy and sufficiency, which sometimes by the counter advocates is portrayed the other way around, almost as sufficiency was leading to more central planning and then less democracy. I'm just considerate of time. We're 7 minutes to go. We could stay here for days, probably. I don't know about our audience for sure, from my perspective, but so let's try to touch upon the last few points in a quite concise way. I have 2 hands raised already. Ines, I go to you first, if you have some remarks about this.
Yeah, just to build on what Yamina was saying, performance economy is an issue that needs to be tackled. Walter Stahel has written profusely on this subject, and I invite you all to check out his work. But I have to say that in terms of the performance economy, we need to be also aware of how it interplays with the current economic system that we have, because if we handle it improperly, it can have a rebound effect as much as efficiency can have a rebound effect. Think, for example, about the profusion of Uber-type systems related to transport in cities, for example, either in cars or in active mobility, so bicycles, etc., which might lead to several businesses setting up models of shared services that end up bringing in more material throughput and energy throughput into the city. So yes, performance economy is something to be considered, and it's needed, but we have to approach it always under the scope of efficacy as well. So being more effective with what you have, that is where performance economy can really strive.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ines. And that's a really important point, which often I think goes forgotten. Priyanut, I see you also have something to say on this topic.
Yes, I also was inspired by Yamina's talk about the new economic growth model. I just would like to touch upon what I just mentioned about, the impact of the COVID-19 on tourism industry in Thailand is so huge. There were about 3 million people, workers in tourist industry, be laid off. They have to go back. But fortunately, Thailand, we are strong in agricultural sector. So one of the policy that the government has been applying this sufficiency, philosophy to create a greener recovery is that how to get these, laid off, workers from tourism industry. They migrate, they migrate back to their hometown, which, they have a lot of empty land, all over the places, because before tourism industry is just separate from livelihood. So now the shape of, tourism industry in Thailand has been changed, to create more resilience. They are, turning into like smallholder farmers, doing their own, maybe like self-reliance, agroforestry, what kinds of labor, but the shape of, tourism will be more agriculture, tourism or well-being tourism, not like before. So this is one thing that, Thai government has been applying the sufficiency economy in, working on greener recovery in terms of tourism, matching with the agricultural sector development, just to give an example of how we really do it in Thailand.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Priyanut. Again, considerate of time, we'll probably go just a couple of minutes beyond, if it's fine for our audience. I will start just a last round of questions, maybe very concise 1-minute answers to that. And actually, start from you, Priyanut. Again, you were involved a lot about education, right? So how to transmit the sufficiency values to the young generations. Now, leveraging your experience in Thailand, of course, you're talking about different contexts. But if you had to extrapolate 2-3 key messages of how we can communicate to the young generations, of course, also the old generations know that because probably even more than the young generations, but how do we instill these principles so that they become the normality?
Okay, 3 points. First, in Thailand, we integrate sufficiency mindset in our national curriculum. So it's not about teaching, but it's about transformative learning. So students have to think a lot before they do any action. Say, for example, if they're going to do some experiment, they have to think about, what will be a suitable, conditions, and they have to be more prudent. So they are integrating the sufficiency mindset into their, daily activities. The second one is to set examples. So society, teachers, school principals, they have to be examples of, sufficiency living models for students. That's very hard, but we are working on that, And the third one is that, media. that's the weakest part in our educational system, because, you know, students now, we know that, you know, they get into social media, whatever. So we are trying to get, you know, students to learn how to live with this, you know, this influx of social media with thinking mind. You know, is this acceptable? Is this reasonable? You know, if we do this, if we spread this fake news, what's going to happen? So make our new generation think a lot about the impact, what will happen if they do things without thinking in terms of sufficiency mindset. So 3 things that I can offer to our colleagues.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Pri. And I think it's a very modern approach and actually applicable in many different contexts. So that's very useful. I go to David now for one last remark. David, as we mentioned before, sometimes sufficiency has been portrayed actually as a global north strategy or priority global north in a various quote, of course. What does sufficiency might look like, again, as a snapshot in the global south, for instance, in the case of infrastructure development? So all those countries that need to build infrastructure, that need to build housing, how does sufficiency help those type of processes?
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. And I was very pleased to hear Valerie and talk about what ADIM are doing for help other countries. What does it mean for countries of the South or deprived communities? What does sufficiency mean for them? Well, I'll come back to one of the reasons this webinar is being held is because of a former president of the World Resources Forum, Frederick Schmidt-Bleek, who was a great man, and he talked about a factor 10 shift. So he was saying that the wealthier countries need to have a factor 10 reduction in their resource use to enable the deprived countries to actually improve their infrastructure and services. And so he drew a graph which showed that those deprived countries, I mean, they need infrastructure, they need housing. So in the initial period, they're able to increase their consumption where they need to. But having said that, I think we also need to help them to get more efficacy, as Ines said, from the spending. It has to be more effective. So there's no point in in putting a lot of money into roads, for instance, when that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. So they need to invest in, in proper transport infrastructure and those kind of things. So I think sufficiency should really have limits in the wealthier countries. They should be under some real restraint to shrink their consumption. And on the other hand, the deprived communities should be able to grow somewhat, but the idea is that they eventually converge together with the global north. Yeah, I think that shrink and share thinking is very important. But the countries of the so-called South shouldn't be imposed on sufficiency because their consumption is way below ours. But if they can find sufficient solutions that enable them to get more value from investments, then of course, why not do it? And we did some of that with work for the UN. We developed policies and frameworks for eco-efficient and inclusive infrastructure solutions for countries, you know, of the South, where they could get more value out of the investments. So, yeah, I think I'll say enough there, but thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, David. And I mean, again, I'm a bit conscious that we are over time, which of course speaks about the quality of the moderator, which is one of those things that you should not allow the panel to do. But I'm maybe a romantic still looks into the conversations more importantly. But just quickly to conclude, Ines, I come to you. For businesses and sufficiency is a lot about narrative. Now, if you were to pitch in 1 minute, so one of those elevator pitches to a C-suite level, why should they as a company consider sufficiency in their core strategy? Of course, you didn't prepare the pitch, so it's not going to be a perfect one, but what kind of words or what kind of arguments would you use?
That's a good question. I usually talk about the importance of your car seating belt. That is an analogy that I use. Either you are a company that puts your seating belt in order to avoid the fine, or either you are a company that puts your seating belt in order to avoid future shocks. So that is the issue with sufficiency. If you are willing to take that seating belt and use it as a way to prepare yourself to what's coming, because it is the laws of physics and thermodynamics, there is no such thing as exponential economic growth on a finite planet, then you are able to sustain and be viable for the long term. That is the key core of thinking about sufficiency within business strategies, in order to guarantee your viability for the long run.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ines. Actually, it sounded as if you already had the pitch ready, but indeed, I think it's a very powerful metaphor that you used here. Valerie, coming to you, you also provided many interesting insights. Maybe just a general remark based on your work as well. How do you see the evolution of the acceptance and understanding of the concept of sufficiency in France? Let's say from a general public perspective, also a policy perspective. Are you hopeful towards its acceptance, or you still see great barriers on the way?
Okay, I think I'm quite hopeful indeed, and I would say it's probably helped by the unfortunate geopolitical context, because about a year ago we couldn't actually talk about our first two scenarios about sufficiency. You know, they were not considered as desirable. Today, it's no longer the question. Now it's we have to deal with it in any case, and it shows that we can use sufficiency also to reach more independency, energy independency, and get rid from the drug, I would say, of fossil fuels that we import from different countries. So hopeful with that, but still there is quite a long way to go, because sufficiency is still a bit confused with efficiency. We can see in the political speeches that there is some confusion about that. And I think just my last word would be that we cannot really dissociate the question of sufficiency from the question about inequality, but actually also that it's not a question of ecological transition. Actually, it's quite different, because it's more a question of good indicators or not. And the GDP is not the only indicator that we should consider. And this is also probably a change of mindset in terms of how we conceive, you know, the wellness of of a society that we need to rebuild.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Valerie. And hope it's still important. So, of course, there's still some confusion, but the idea that we can get there, it's key. Yamina, to you, last minute, a little bit more freestyle to you, but maybe just one question to start the freestyle of this last minute. Is sufficiency, after all, such a radical idea as many portray, or we should move towards more normalizing it as much as possible?
It's not a radical idea. It has been there, and we see from the Thai example, from the Thai feedback, that it has been there for a while. It's just that it challenges the way we do science, the way we do policies, and we don't want to be challenged. And we just have to accept that we have done things. As I like this definition about the difference between efficiency and sufficiency. It was the German Wolfgang Sachs who said that efficiency is about doing things right, and sufficiency is about doing the right things. So the question for us is, do we want to continue to do things right, even if they are wrong? Do you want to continue doing the wrong things right? This means that it will take us to the wrong path. And I assume that we all would like to do the right things. But it is, of course, challenging, because we were, when I was a student, I did not have training on sufficiency. I was not in Thailand. I did not have the opportunity to benefit from the program put in place by the panelists. So we are challenged in the way we approach science, in the way we approach the inequality issues, in the way we approach decarbonization. We must be up to this and start working on it. So I do believe that sufficiency will become mainstream. And when I was working on the IPCC report, I was really delighted to have ADEME doing this work. It was extremely useful to have a national energy agency doing this work. So it's not at all radical. ADEME is not radical at all. It's not the job, it's not the role of ADEME to be radical. Otherwise, it will not exist, you see? So if ADEME has done it, I do believe that any other agency and any other ministry in the world can do it. And as climate scientists, I would say that they should do it, not just they can, they should.
Perfect, thanks a lot. I mean, indeed, that was the idea that we have to move away from this understanding of sufficiency radical and just accept and embrace actually the challenging of our mindsets that come with that. Now, again, 10 minutes above, which speaks about me, not about you. I mean, of course, speaks positive about you and all the ideas that you could share with us. Just to conclude, this was a very long conversation, and of course, we could go on for much longer. Unfortunately, we can't in this case, but fortunately, we have a couple of happenings in the next year which will dive into sufficiency even more. One of them is the World Resources Forum 2023 conference, Rethinking Value Resources for Planetary Wellbeing, which will take place between the 4th and 6th of September 2023, both in Geneva and with an online setup, where sufficiency will be one of the 3 conference tracks. So there will be one of the opportunities for diving even more into this topic. And you hear more from us about the conference and the role that sufficiency will play in there. Another of the occasions, I will just give the word quickly to David to basically announce, and also thanking you, David, for mentioning Frederick Schmidt-Blake before in your intervention, which was indeed honorary president of the World Resources Forum and has been a key figure in our intellectual history. But David, just very shortly about the announcement.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. It's quite a challenge to introduce sufficiency here and get dialogues underway. But I'm pleased to say that Yamina and we managed to get a small grant from the Australian-French Association for Research and Innovation. It's mainly to hold an international forum early next year. And the idea is that would enable my city, Adelaide, and South Australia to learn from what ADEME and France are doing, and Yamina, and to get some the politicians here to start to get interested. And I'm happy to say that a few of them already are. So we haven't set a date yet, but you know, we'll try to do that soon. But it will be early 2023, and will include live audiences in Paris and Adelaide, but it will also be online. So there'll be an opportunity for Thailand and perhaps China to get involved. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. So just messages that there is more interest in the topic, and there are lots of things to look forward as well in 2023. Now, just last words of gratitude, of course, from my side, both, of course, to you as speakers for making this event such a lively, engaging, and interesting event that pushes us to challenge our mindset, as we mentioned before. And of course, to the audience as well, who was very active and engaged in the chat, I could see, and also stay with us despite the delay that we had, or at least the overtime that we had. So I wish you, all of you, a good day and a good night for those where the sun has already gone down. And yeah, we will keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.